Hello, and welcome to the Quarterly Romance Book Club. I am joined today by Chloe and by Gigi. I am going to let them both introduce themselves in just a second, but today we're talking about How to End a Love Story by Yulin Kuang. And the author is, I believe, Chinese, because I think that was mentioned throughout the book. And I clearly did not know what this book was about. Because there's a lot of things in here that I was not expecting. So I don't have all of the trigger warnings, but I know that suicide is one of them. So suicide, grief, loss of a family member, those are things you should kind of be aware of going into it. But before we jump into our initial thoughts, I do want to go ahead and let everyone introduce themselves. So Chloe, since you're right next to me, go ahead and share your initial thoughts too.
Hello. My name is Chloe. I'm mostly Brunette Bibliophile on all the social medias. You can finally find me most active on Instagram and not as active on YouTube anymore. I do have a list of content warnings that I'll read off, like when we're closer to getting to that. I was expecting like a super emotional, like throughout the whole story, and it wasn't. It was emotional, but not like heavy like I was expecting, which is totally fine. I gave it 5 stars. I really enjoyed it. I don't think it's something that would be like a new all-time favorite, but not all 5 stars are created equal, in my opinion. And I didn't really have any problems with it. I had a really good time while I was listening to it. And this was a highly anticipated read for me. Yulin Kuang is screenwriting or adapting some of Emily Henry's work, and there was a lot of hype around that, as well as around this book when it came out. And I had a great time with it. There's definitely those emotional aspects, but I also found that there were some funny moments or some sweet moments sprinkled throughout. And overall, I just had a good time with this one.
Gigi.
Hi, I'm Gigi. You can find me at Books After Cafecito, mostly on Instagram. I'm rarely on TikTok anymore, and my YouTube journey is all over the place. So, Instagram for now. About the book, I didn't really read about the book before I started reading the book itself. I started reading it as an audiobook, and I did that on Spotify. So I ran out of audiobook hours about 75% of the way through. So I finished the book itself physically last night. I have mixed emotions about the book. I gave it 4 stars. So I'm right up there as with Chloe, as it wasn't as emotional as I thought it was going to be, but there were certain elements to it that upset me, not emotionally, but just it triggered a visceral response. And then others that I thought were very sweet and charming. So, like I said, mixed feelings.
And my name is Desirai. You are on my channel. You can find me at Libri Labra on all the things like here, YouTube. I haven't touched TikTok too much, but there are some videos on there if you want to go back and look at them. And I spend most of my time on Instagram now and Threads, I guess. But I think I would also give it like 4 stars. I was describing it to my husband today, and he was very like, what the fuck? Like, he was like, why is that the premise of like, it just, he felt like it was just very, very intense. I don't know if she was writing from any of her own experiences relating to this, because I didn't look into that. I guess that's something that I can look up in a bit. But that's a very, very heavy place of grief to start from. And I think there's just a lot of stuff that she had to go through before she could even make sense of what was happening with Grant. And it was a lot. I thought it was intense. Thankfully, well, I don't know. I don't want to jump into spoilers just yet, but I guess I'll jump into that in a little bit. But that's kind of where I was feeling. It was just a very grief heavy place to kind of start the story, and I didn't realize that that was the premise of the book. So I think this was my pick, though, right? I think so.
I don't remember. Okay. What did we read last quarter? I don't remember either.
Was it I think so, the partner plot?
Oh, yeah. Okay. Because I feel like you sent me a couple of choices and I was like, that one, I have a review for it.
Because like I got this from Book of the Month, and then we also got it from the Libro FM ALCs. So that's probably either why you picked it or I picked it or whatever. So we're just like, well, we have it and we have to review it, so might as well read it and talk about it. But yeah, it was a bit of a surprise in like the first chapter when she's talking about her sister and stuff. But now that we've kind of gone over initial thoughts, we are going to jump into spoiler territory. So if you haven't read the book, if you want to read the book, go read it, come back and watch our discussion afterwards. I know Gigi has already said that she didn't really know that much about the book either, but did you know that there was a sister and what had happened?
No.
Okay.
No. I had no idea. And when I started listening to it, I was like, wow, this really is like going off from page 1.
You did say that. And
Yeah.
I didn't even make that connection afterwards. But...
Well, and this is also a book club pick for the book club that I do at work as well. So this is only the first time I'm going to be discussing it. I'll have a whole other discussion in a week too.
I think the thing that struck me is not just how heavy the grief was, but also how complicated the emotions were, right? Like now that we're in spoiler territory, so the book like essentially starts off with her kind of dealing with her sister's suicide, and her sister stepped out in front of a car, and the love interest in this book is the person that hit and killed her. And that's like how do you, that is such a complicated emotion, because sure, maybe like logically your brain might be saying it wasn't his fault, but your heart, your body, everything's going to be saying something completely different. So to like work through that, what were you thinking about that specific piece of it, especially when we're talking about like a romance and a romantic interest?
I mean, when I was thinking about it when I was writing my review, I can understand how her parents feel and the grief behind that, because it is like a complicated situation. And but I also felt bad for him a little bit too, that he was kind of forced into this situation. Like it really wasn't his fault, but there's so many like different emotions for all the different people involved.
What about you, Gigi?
Yeah, I definitely felt, you always feel for, obviously, for the family that's going through the tragedy. But when you take into context how old he was, the fact that it wasn't like he was not being a safe driver or anything like that, and it also happened to him. And at such a young age that now you have to live with that for the rest of your life, knowing that you killed someone. That made me feel so bad, especially in that initial scene where he even felt like he had to go to the funeral to pay his respects and was immediately pushed out.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah. So I that's already my initial mixed feelings started basically at the beginning with how he was being treated. It's understandable, which is why they're mixed feelings. So it's like, from the family's perspective, you can absolutely understand that they don't want anything to do with essentially the person that killed their child, even though it was accidental, and even though it was also a suicide. There's those two very, very specific aspects of it. It's like, it's not just an accident that, oh my gosh, it was an accident, but you killed her. It was like, no, but she also meant for this to happen. So it's so layered. It's hard to not feel bad for him, though, because he was a child, basically.
I think also, like, you know, in order for them to be able to kind of forgive him or like absolve him of it not being his fault, I think they'd have to grapple with like why their own child took their own life and what they could have done better for that not to have happened. Maybe there is no answer. Maybe sometimes people just do that anyway, like regardless of what's going on. But it's still, I think, like a question that people probably should ask themselves, like replay back what they missed, or and I know sometimes it can be really hard because we blame ourselves for things that aren't necessarily our fault. But but as parents, I don't know. It's just it's so rough. But I agree with you that I kind of did feel bad for him because I think he was trying to do his best to show up in like all sorts of different ways and was just getting blocked at like every turn. Um, there was a specific line in the book where he was like saying like it could have been anyone, it just happened to be me, and that just sucks so bad. Like, um, what to kind of shift things a little bit, what did you guys think of the team that they were working with on the project?
I liked that we had a lot of different personalities. There were some times where it might have been like a little bit hard to keep up with how many people there were. Um, but overall, I liked the different side characters that we were able to interact with, and I liked that this is probably an accurate representation of creating a TV show or a series, just because of the author's background.
Yeah, I also appreciated that there were so many different personalities. And even though I wouldn't say they were extremely integral in the main character's story, but they were almost like sounding boards for them throughout, which I found was helpful in them figuring themselves out throughout the course of the relationship. So I think they definitely served their purpose.
What did you guys think of the format of how this was written? Do you feel like it helped the story? Do you feel like you kind of didn't notice it, or? And I can elaborate more if you're like, what do you mean the format?
Well, if I think I understand what you're asking, I think it was adapted or written really well for an audiobook, especially because they did two narrators. If they hadn't done two narrators, unless the one single narrator would have been very distinct, it would have been kind of hard to separate the voices. But I had an overall like good time just listening to it.
Yeah, same. I enjoyed the audiobook. I'm always a little thrown off because I've gotten so used to reading in first person that whenever it's a third person narration, it tends to every so often take me out of it. And then I have to bring myself back in, which usually will happen once the dialogue kicks in because then it's back into like that first person
Right,
territory. Yeah. But it was fine overall. I didn't have really any issues with it.
I feel like it felt relatively like dialogue heavy throughout it. But what I was struggling with was that when you have two narrators, I'm kind of used to it alternating chapters. So the fact that it was alternating like their perspectives within each chapter was a little bit confusing because I was also trying to like keep up by reading the book and listen at the same time. And sometimes I'd be like, where the hell am I? Like, I couldn't find the chapter because it was like switching within the chapter. But I guess maybe that was a little bit like making it feel a little bit more duetty, even though it wasn't duet narration. It was still just dual narration. Go ahead.
Typically, I would have a problem with how it was written because I agree, like switching mid chapter really throws me off. But I actually think it worked out really well with this one to really capture both of their emotions in a certain situation or scenario.
Yeah, I agree with that, especially because sometimes with dual POVs, they have to, instead of it continuing the story every other chapter, they have to backtrack the story to get that other person's perspective. So I do agree that it definitely helped move the story along a lot more with a lot more fluidity than other books that I've read. So it didn't bother me.
What were you like? How did you feel about the spice level of the book?
It was way spicier than I thought it was going to be, which is fine. Like that's not a problem. I wasn't expecting it.
So to be fair, this is going to sound so bad. I don't remember half of it. Like the spices, I don't remember them. Either I have this weird thing when it comes to reading romance novels. Not that I don't enjoy the spice. I do. I read pretty heavy, spicy books. But sometimes when it's very plot heavy, the spice in my brain, it gets lost because I'm so focused on the plot of the story that I forget what happened in the spicy scene. So I honestly don't even remember those scenes.
Do you guys think they had good chemistry?
I don't know how to answer that. I feel like I mean, you could kind of even say it's a bit forced proximity just because of their job as well. They were kind of forced to be together on this job, and it, they could have avoided each other, but inevitably they decided to reach not necessarily peace, but find some kind of a middle ground.
Yeah, I don't know about chemistry. I feel like, again, same thing, forced proximity. Like they were forced to have to work together, and it also coming from the backstory that they did and not having faced that with each other, they were forced to face each other in that way. And then out of that, maybe build a relationship. But there was a little bit of a disconnect for me when it came to their chemistry. I feel like because it was forced proximity, it can work in certain circumstances, but I feel like, okay, so now because you're physically attracted to this person, you're like, okay, well, I can kind of forget this, but I can't, but I can, but I can't. And so this is, I don't know, it was a weird dynamic. And it took me a little while to be like, okay, so they are actually attracted to each other. Is it not just trauma bonding? Because they're both facing opposite sides of the same trauma and now facing it together and kind of trying to understand each other's perspectives on it. Is it real chemistry or is it trauma bonding, basically?
I can see that. But there's certain things that happened in the book that made me feel like they could have possibly like ended up together before the whole sister thing happened if it hadn't happened, because it almost seemed like with some of his internal dialogue, like that he just was like, before they even started working on that project, that he was already kind of attracted to her, or he already kind of cared for her, because like they went to school together, they went to high school together, right? So it seemed like maybe they had like a little kindling of something prior to what happened with her sister, but I don't know if it was laid out like super clearly, but there was a few things that just made me think, but I do get the trauma bonding thing, and like it sucks, but trauma bonding is like a really just strong, very intense emotion. So like it's not surprising that something like that would happen. But I felt like I could see their chemistry. It might just be because I'm more of a person who just likes yearning, because I will find like, for me, the yearning is sometimes hotter than the sex scenes itself. And so the fact that like she was like trying really hard to stay away from him and not talk to him, but then she was dreaming about him, and I don't know if it was like on their vacation or what. I think it must have been, because they were in the same place staying together, and she had just had a dream about him, and he was like, "Are you okay?" And she like didn't want to say anything. She didn't want him to know what had happened, and he was like avoiding the bathroom because he had an erection. He had just woken up, and like I don't know, that whole scene, I was like, oh, okay, that's where we're at. So like to me, I feel like that was the first sign of like, okay, they do have chemistry. They're already like thinking about each other, sleeping in separate rooms, and like, so I kind of liked the chemistry, even though some of it was a little awkward and weird at times. It was still vulnerable, and I think that's what made it appealing to me, just like the honesty and the vulnerability in it. I know I had wanted to look up if there was any, because this was a Reese book club pick. Where did I see that? Because it's not on my book. I saw it somewhere, but I wanted to see if they had like some discussion questions. Chloe, is there anything? Because sometimes I know you write notes. Did you write any notes for this?
Not this time. I mean, I do have my review up in a tab, but it's I mean, a lot of it is very like non-spoilery, very generic. I've already said it.
Okay, let me see. Because it was like Elise's book club pick. Oh, I don't know if you've read this, Gigi. I know that Chloe has, but we read another book that I feel like released maybe right before this one, or did they release at the same time, called Romantic Comedy? Did you read that one?
No, I haven't read that one.
Do you remember, Chloe?
I feel like I've heard of it though.
I remember it. I don't know if they came out around the same time.
Because for some reason I pair them in my head. Like I feel like they're similar in the sense that like there's writers in a writing room. Like it's very like industry.
It must have been before. What year did this come out? Did this come out in 2024? It must have been like 2023 because I got Romantic Comedy from Book of the Month, but I canceled Book of the Month at the end of like 2023, I think. Yeah, and this one came out in 2024.
All right, let's see. Okay, it says Helen and Grant have very different personalities and ways of coping with their shared past. How did these differences create tension and growth in their relationship?
Can you repeat the question?
Yep. They have different ways of dealing with their shared past. How did these differences create tension and growth in their relationship?
I think part of it also, like for her, also had to do with her relationship with her parents. Because they are very much like he is to blame, he is at fault, especially her mom with the whole situation. So I think while she wanted to be with him and have whatever kind of relationship she was thinking about, she also was thinking about, like, especially when her parents came to town, like how could I even navigate this? Whereas he wasn't thinking about her parents being there at all.
Yeah, and also the fact that he was very willing to have the discussion, to have the conversation, to face it head on, and she was very avoidant of it the entire time. And that also traces back to like her background and her family because they it seems to come from that structure of, she even mentions it at one point that she never really observed her parents being loving towards one another. She never really observed them like saying I love you out loud. And so that plus their background culturally and possibly maybe not even believing in therapy, that kind of situation, a lot of that had to do with then her becoming an adult and almost taking on those tendencies for herself as like, you know, I'd rather just avoid it and not talk about it. Don't bring her up. Don't talk about her. Like she never actually dealt with it on a personal level. So then to have someone who was also so closely involved to the situation be willing to talk about it, I think caused a lot of tension between them.
I know at some point she also mentions how like she did not introduce anyone she's ever dated to like her parents because I guess just the weight of it, right? Because they would probably kind of assume that she would be marrying whoever it was, and like she didn't even want to deal with it or bring anybody home until it was serious enough to have that conversation. Go ahead.
I was also wondering if it could be like a cultural background for why her parents are like insistent of he killed her, he did this, as opposed to in reality she committed suicide and he just happened to be a casualty of the situation.
I feel like that is definitely part of the rigidity of the background of not wanting to face those particular facts of the situation and finding a way to divert the blame onto someone else because, oh, not my child would never. And I feel like a lot of cultures have that. Not just the Chinese culture, but I know plenty of Latin cultures that also parents don't want to talk about it. That's like, no, we're not gonna, disgrace their legacy that way. They've already passed. What's done is done. We're gonna honor that person, but also hold that grudge because that's another person who is alive who they can pass the blame on to. I've seen it happen in a lot of cultures, but they all share that similarity, which is really strange.
Yeah, no, I know it's like super ingrained in me that like you don't speak bad about the dead. Like it's just and it's hard when you have like family members who, you know, nobody's perfect, but you know, who have made like maybe major mistakes, or like you want to be able to kind of talk about it and it gets like just shut down essentially. The author explores themes of grief, guilt, and forgiveness throughout the novel. Which character's journey with these emotions resonated with you the most, and why?
Can you repeat the question again?
Mm-hmm. The author explores themes of grief, guilt, and forgiveness throughout the book. Which character's journey with these emotions resonated with you the most, and why?
We didn't get a lot of super like interaction in her thoughts because she's a side character, but I actually want to touch on the mom with this one. And I'm actually going to jump all the way to the end because it seemed that she had reached a point of acceptance of Grant being in her daughter's life. And I particularly liked at the end when they were engaged and her mom said like you need to honor your sister. He needs to honor, I think her name was Michelle. And they went to the little altar, and at the end her mom was saying like, well, there's no right or wrong way to do it, but it's that you're respectful. And I was like, that was so touching.
Yeah, it's interesting because I don't have a lot of experience with grief, but with feelings of like when it touched on Grant's feelings of guilt, I did feel a lot of empathy with him, especially when they when they finally get to the part that they're telling each other finally like the whole story of what happened from their perspective and how it made them feel, and he's going through all of these emotions, and this is what after he's had how many panic attacks and been triggered by the smallest things to a car accident on the 405 or whatever it was. Like, obviously that guilt, even though it was not his fault, it's ingrained in him that it was. And to see him, even as an adult, have to work through that, but also to have her there to work through that as someone that was her sister. You know, he would have never thought that he would even be deserving of having someone from this girl's life there to support him getting through this process. I found that very heartwarming and also necessary to get them to a point that eventually they could end up together.
I don't know if it was about like resonating with one character more, because I feel like I can almost see both sides. Like I can see the struggle and the anxiety that Grant would be feeling, because like there's really like basically nothing he could have done. There's just nothing he could have done, and he was just stuck with that outcome, and you know, like you said, having to live with that for the rest of his life. And I think I'm a bit of a control freak, so that would just drive me crazy. Like I get the anxiety aspect of it. I get like just that feeling of being trapped and not having been able to do anything differently. But I also know like what it feels like to lose a sibling, and I don't think there's anything comparable to that. You know, when you lose like a parent, I think there's this expectation that that's going to happen at some point, so it just feels so different than unexpectedly losing a sibling. And that grief is just really, really heavy. So I get how she was just asking herself so many questions and constantly like revisiting her sister's folders and like just trying to find answers. So I don't know. I feel like I kind of connected a bit or resonated a bit with both of them. Let's see. All right. How does Helen's identity as an Asian American woman and her relationship with her immigrant parents influence her actions and her decisions? I kind of feel like we talked a little bit about that, so I'm going to skip that question. How does Helen's career as a YA author contrast with Grant's experiences as a screenwriter? Do you want me to repeat the question?
I mean, honestly, I was kind of surprised she had as much power in the adaptation process as I feel like we hear from other authors who have no hands-on anything. Yeah. So, but I mean, she did negotiate to be into the writer's room, and I guess she is giving herself like a bit more experience because, I mean, screenwriting is probably a bit more reliable than book writing. I feel like there's always going to be a TV show. There's not always going to be a book deal.
Really? That's interesting.
Yeah, I also felt like with her as an author, she had her outlet, especially when dealing with this trauma, because it very heavily related back to her real life experience. The entire story, the series, it was very heavily inspired by her real life, versus Grant being a screenwriter, he is basically just helping with other people's stories. So she had that outlet. Where was his? That's kind of the dichotomy that I saw.
Right. It says this book provides insight into the world of TV writing and production. Did you find this aspect of the story interesting, and how did it contribute to the overall narrative? I think one of the things that was kind of interesting for me, not just seeing the world of TV and writing production, was that my husband just went to California recently. He was in LA, and so like just hearing about some of the places he was at, and it was just interesting that it kind of overlapped like that just happened. And he was sending me pictures of like the stars from the Walk of Fame and just like different things that he saw. But I do find that aspect of the story interesting. I love seeing inside industries like that, whether it's like books that like show you how a video game is made, or I love when writers write about writing. Like that to me is like super fascinating. Like I have a few books on my TBR that are like music related or music industry related, and I think it's amazing. Like, have you read Check and Mate? I know Chloe has. Have you? Okay, it's an Ali Hazelwood book. Have you read any Ali Hazelwood?
I think I've only read The Love Hypothesis. I have a bunch. I just haven't read them. But I have Checkmate. I think it's one of the three that I have. But I've read The Love Hypothesis. I think that's it.
So the two that like kind of stick out in my mind are Check and Mate, because it was so heavily entrenched in like chess culture, chess playing, like amazing. And then the other one is the Julie Soto book, which was Not Another Love Song. Is that what it's called? Yeah. And that was just like classical music, orchestral like stuff. And just seeing people write about that is amazing. So I do like seeing into TV writing and production. And then also the other book that we talked about, romantic comedy, is also like this woman who kind of is part of like an SNL team sort of. And to get that inside information is just, it's fascinating to me.
I definitely would say I wasn't bored with this book. I feel like some people might find the screenwriting or TV production elements boring, but I definitely was not bored with it. It kept it like interesting, especially knowing the author's background with it.
Yeah, and I think it also, in a weird way, brought levity to the book, just because it brought you out of the seriousness and the heaviness of the subject matter and gave you that little bit of a behind the scenes look of what it takes. And I agree with what Chloe said about like, I'm surprised she had as much input as she did, being not just part of the writer's room, but being there when they were filming. I'm just like, since when? Like, besides maybe having like a guest spot momentarily, like as a background somewhere in a shot. That to me was extremely surprising, but I guess it also gave them more time to be around each other, which may have been the purpose. But it was nice. And also seeing her parents get involved towards the end, of like coming out there, being behind the scenes while they're shooting scenes, and being with her on a 14-day, shoot day. It was a nice reprieve from the heaviness of the book.
So the book touches on challenges of building and maintaining friendships and adulthood. Could you relate to any of that?
I mean, I think a lot of people could probably relate to I don't want to say feeling stuck, but I'm going to say it because I can't think of another term for it, where she couldn't decide if she was going to stay in California or go back to New York, or she was in this rut and she just wasn't sure what to do. And she also had the writer's block, which is why she negotiated her way into the writer's room. So I feel like she was kind of at a crossroads in her life, and I think a lot of people can relate to that.
And her experiences with her friends from New York versus her friends from LA were very different. And from what I remember, she does mention later on that she does reunite with her friends from New York, and it was different than what she was assuming was their discussion behind closed doors about her, or maybe what they have felt about her now that, oh, she's going to LA, she thinks she's a big shot. Like, she had this internal monologue that I think she was kind of putting a blockade on herself with her friendships. And she just had a lot of insecurities about that. But I feel like, me personally, I've had an easier time making friends as an adult than I ever did just growing up as a teenager or as a child. And being able to maintain those friendships, just because there's an understanding now that it's like, yeah, we all have our own lives. We're all busy. But we have some kind of common ground that keeps bringing us back together for whatever it may be. And not having to always have so many friends, I think, is another thing that's super important as an adult, to realize, like, oh, I don't have to have 15 friends to feel like I have, or like I'm good at being a friend. One friend sometimes is even enough. So I think her growing into that and seeing that even in the writer's room, she grew closer to certain people and not to others. And that's okay. But you were able to still be amicable and get along with pretty much everyone there.
I think I'm always hearing from other adults, like, it's so hard to make friends as an adult, because like here I run multiple book clubs, and obviously the purpose of people coming to the book club is to make friends, right? And so they mentioned that, like, unless you're actively trying to do stuff, sorry, hold on, my laptop is dying and it's not charging. Why is it not charging? Okay, there we go. Sorry. Yeah, so like, when you're in school and it's proximity based, right? You have people in your class or whatever, and sometimes people make friends at work, but I think as a society we often say that that's like a no not to make friends at work. But unless we're out there actively trying by joining hobbies or clubs or stuff, I think it is a bit more difficult to kind of make friends as an adult. Although I feel like the easiest way for me has always just been making friends online, because that feels the most comfortable, and then you're not limited by that proximity. But yeah, I get that. So how does the author balance the romance with heavier themes like suicide and family expectations? And do you feel like that balance was effective?
That camping trip where they got high on the hike or something like that. I barely even remember it, but it was until just like, there's some levity. That
was interesting. Not what I was expecting to happen. So I don't know. What do you think, Gigi? You're muted.
Yeah, sorry. I also had to exit my screen to check my battery. When you said yours, I was like, oh, let me check real quick, and then I moved my mouse. I loved that scene, honestly, because it it takes you completely out of the heaviness of the book, and it's just like a fun moment. And it's like, yeah, we're all adults, but we're all being real silly right now. And I love that. I think that's great. But as far as like the romance versus, I feel like it was balanced, but it was so intertwined that it's hard to separate the two, because this romance building is happening while they're also still dealing with the trauma. So I don't think there's a real way to separate it.
All right. What did you think about Helen keeping her relationship with Grant a secret from her family? Was this decision understandable given the circumstances? I think the answer is very much yes. But I think we also touched on that a little as well, but I don't know if you guys want to add any more about that specifically.
Well, she also had a habit of it kind of culminated into this being like one of the big things she hid from them, mainly because of who it was. But throughout, she was saying how she was basically hide anything that was negative, anything that wasn't great, anything that wasn't like a highlight in her life. She was hiding all of it from them because all she's trying to do is protect their feelings. And so obviously, yes, this being the biggest thing of like this person that you've basically hated for so long, now I'm romantically involved with him. Like that's a huge jump. And them already not knowing anything about her life really, besides the little things she lets them know. That is what ended up blowing up at the hospital after her accident, and why she I guess was so overwhelmed with not letting everything out that she kind of exploded too. But her mom said it perfectly. Like, she never tells us anything. How are we supposed to know anything if she doesn't tell us anything? So keeping those things, as much as saying it may hurt or it may be a struggle, in the end, it's going to eventually blow up in your face.
By the end of the novel, how have Helen and Grant changed? Do you think they adequately address their past to move forward together?
I think her seeing him have a panic attack kind of really brought his feelings to light for her and getting his perspective on it, because really she's only ever known her own and her parents' feelings, and we already know her parents think that it's his fault, when in reality he was just a kid and he was just in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Yeah, I think as far as dealing with the tragedy, I feel that it's shown as always being an ongoing thing, maybe not as heavy later on. It's just like, you have to now kind of let it settle. You've come to terms with it. It's never going to fully go away. It's always going to be present, but are you going to let it affect now the relationship that you have? That's the choice that they made, not to let it. And in a way, because they stuck with it in the end, that's what eventually won over her parents. If you want to call it winning it over. I mean, with the way that her parents are, it's hard to know. But they at least came to some type of acceptance, which I believed helped them be able to reach that goal of being together.
And the last question is, Yulin Kuang is also a screenwriter. So do you think her background in screenwriting influences her writing style and storytelling approach in this novel? And I think it did a lot, especially since when you consider that screenwriting is primarily dialogue. There is some descriptions here and there, but it's like primarily dialogue. I felt like that did come across in her writing in this book. I felt like it was dialogue heavy, but not in a negative way. I mean, personally, sometimes when I'm really entrenched in a book, sometimes I skip descriptions just to read the dialogue, because that's where all like the action is happening. So I feel like that's also part of what kept this moving and kept it like fairly interesting was all the dialogue and the conversations that were happening. What do you guys think?
I mean, I don't know how much of like a for writing wise, but I definitely think it helped with the plot of the story she had, since I've already touched on the various things in the writing room and the behind the scenes for sure.
Yeah, definitely with that. And also something I appreciated was for Grant, his being so attached to the artistic side of himself, and that's why he's able to that's why he's able to express so many different emotions, and he's able to be open with Helen, and get on his knees and beg her, and she's like, oh, you're being dramatic. It's like, well, I'm an artist, like we're artists, that we're in the artistic world, like, so bringing that from her experience and being able to put that into a male character, I thought was very interesting.
And I'm just going to look up who the two narrators were so I can give them credit. Was the male narrator Teddy Hamilton? Because that's who, like, it sounded like to me. Hold on a second.
No, I've heard other things that he's done before, but it definitely wasn't Teddy Hamilton.
Okay.
Let's see. The male narrator was Andrew Eden. Did you listen to
or the same guy
as what?
As Teddy Hamilton. Like he has two names. Hold on.
No,
there's another one that does that too. And
yeah, Jacob Morgan has another name too.
Yes, he does.
Zach Weber, Jacob Morgan. Those are two the same person, right? Okay.
Which love him, by the way.
Oh my God, you're right. It is.
See,
is it right though? Because I typically pick up Teddy Hamilton's voice right away.
No, bro, as soon as he started, I was like, "That sounds like Teddy Hamilton," and
I did not catch that.
I need to re-listen to it again because he also did When in Rome as well.
Didn't he also do Zayden's chapters in Fourth Wing? Yeah.
Yeah. So. And he does the Love Hypothesis.
What?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he does Adam's chapter.
Interesting.
That's why I can't listen to the Love Hypothesis.
I know, because Adam Driver.
Yeah.
All right. So the narrators for How to End a Love Story were Catherine Chin and Andrew Eden, aka Teddy Hamilton.
That was news to me. Holy moly.
I just listened to 9 Month Contract, and as that's duet narrated, as soon as it started, I was like, that's Teddy Hamilton.
That's funny. I'm gonna have to. I don't think I started listening to that. I haven't jumped into that yet. But is there anything that we haven't touched on that you guys might want to touch on before we jump into, like, I guess, final thoughts? You want to go ahead?
I will say I did really like at the end her the way she came to terms with her sister's passing, the suicide, how they left things, like the last things that they said to each other, and the way she kind of turned that into like an outline for a book, I thought was very cathartic and a really nice way to kind of put that to rest and let it be, and just have all her thoughts written out, kind of like a diary, and almost like she's also having a conversation with her sister, and to give herself that peace. I found that so nice at the end of the book. I felt like that was a really nice way to kind of close things off.
Yeah, cathartic is a great way to explain that. How about you, Chloe?
No, I agree. It definitely came like full circle.
All right. Well, if you guys want, we can do final thoughts and then just wrap things up. Yeah, I'm still 4 stars. Again, I was surprised by the initial grief that started this story off, which was like definitely intense and heavy, and you have 2 characters struggling with the same situation but from very, very, very different perspectives. I did love all of the writing room stuff and like just the inside industry perspective. That's always cool. The complexity of her dealing with the death of her sister, but then also dealing with like the cultural aspects of her Chinese family. There's just like a lot going on here, but because it's written by a screenwriter, and it kind of like you get that sense. I mean, I would love to see this adapted and see how that plays out. But sometimes screenwriters want to get away from screenwriting and want to have something that they don't have to think about being adapted. So I don't know if that was the case here, but I just always like seeing things visually. So that's just me. But those are my kind of final thoughts on it.
I mean, I had a good time with this book. It is definitely very grief heavy while also having some like lighter touches throughout the plot. I definitely would be interested in seeing more from this author. Um, although she might be busy for a little bit adapting all those Emily Henry books. Because I read the back of her bio and it said she's screenwriting People We Meet on Vacation, and she's writing and directing Beach Read.
Oh wow.
And I know that Emily Henry is screenwriting one of her own books, but I can't remember which one it is. But I mean, overall, 5 stars. I am really glad that I finally got to read this book. And I definitely think it lives up to the hype.
So yeah, I did enjoy it. I gave it 4 stars. Mostly because at the beginning, I think I was so jarred by how she was treating him in a professional setting, kind of in a it's so hard because like what she's dealing with. She's dealing with grief. She still hasn't not gotten over, but she hasn't dealt with her sister's death and how it happened or approaching him. And so the way she dealt with him seemed very immature, but also very like catty. And like it was very attacking. It was very like, no, you need to quit. And it was just like, okay, can you leave the guy alone? Just take your space, avoid him if you have to, but you're in a professional setting. So I think that threw me a little bit, which is why I was like, I don't like this. And it lasted a bit, like almost a bit too long for me with the way she was treating him until it finally subsided. So that's, I think, where the star deduction came from for me. But other than that, I honestly wish I could have finished the book on audiobook. I hate that Spotify limits the amount of time you have for audiobooks, because that final conversation that they have before I think she ends up leaving back to New York, where it's like he's begging her to give them a try and she's giving him all the reasons they can and all. I wanted to hear that conversation so badly of how they interacted with that, because I could, since I listened to the audiobook, I had already kind of the voices in my head, so I could be like, okay, this is how they would say it, but I really wanted the full impact of that. I think it ended brilliantly. It didn't feel rushed at all or anything. So yeah, truly enjoyed it.
All right, so 4 stars, 4 stars, 5 stars. And for the most part, we did really enjoy the book. Chloe, what are we reading next quarter?
It's a fantastic question. Let's see.
I think Gigi's in the title, isn't it?
Yes. We are going to be reading Gigi Listening by Chantel Guertin.
I've never heard of this, and I feel like I should have. It's my namesake.
Here's the thing, and I wish I had thought about this sooner, because we've been doing quarterly romance and just book clubs in general for years now, is why did I not start nominating books that I had to review for book club? This is a book that I need to review. And I'm like, perfect.
True. Do you know what it's about?
No.
Okay. Do you want to keep it that way?
Sure. Because I'm not going to think about it until I have to pick it up.
Yeah, I'm very much the go in blind. Unless I've seen other people's reviews or someone's hyping something up and they're giving like tidbits here and there, I am very much a go in blind. There aren't really any like trigger warnings. I'm that type of person. Trigger warnings or content warnings, like I'm down for anything. I've been through my own fair share of trauma, and I'm still like, you know what, hit me at this point. I'll take it. So.
I feel that. I also just feel like, the less I know, the less expectations I can have about it either way, and then I tend to enjoy the book better that way. So
yeah, I read the synopsis right before I start.
Right before.
Seriously, I'm like, all right, I'm going to start this book. What's the synopsis? Great, go. Let's go.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I did that with this one, and even then, I had to look at it again to see if it mentioned what the premise was really about, because I was like, yeah, I know it said something about an accident, but I don't remember it saying anything about that. Yeah.
But all right, well, if you guys are still here, thank you for joining us. Chloe, you're normally always here, but Gigi, thank you for being a guest again.
Thank you for having me.
And we'll see you next quarter.